Hi, everybody. Betsy Davis here for another episode of Colorbar with Kim Updike.
Hello, Betsy. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Okay, you know this is my favorite topic.
I'm glad it's somebody's favorite topic.
Yeah, I'm be rocking and scratching, and I don't mean to Johnny Cash before this podcast is over. So we'll dive right into content.
Yeah, so let's just go ahead and talk about how fitting our attire is for this conversation.
Yeah.
So you have your skull shirt on.
I've got my skull sweater vest on.
Yep.
Yep.
Which just to me means kind of, I don't know, death.
Death or
Yep.
or proceed with great caution. Which is how I probably take this topic.
That's exactly
great
right.
Caution.
That's exactly right. And then Johnny Cash, I did not intend to do this, but since we're talking about it, it reminds me of some of my favorite Johnny Cash. You know, I'm living in a ring of fire.
There you go.
of content, and I feel like I'm in Folsom Prison sometimes when I'm trying to create content. So this is going to be fun. I admit I got a little anxious whenever we started talking about this topic because there's so much.
It's an overwhelming topic. I mean, it's an overwhelming topic for me. Now, I get that, you know, I have not probably embraced this as fully as other people have. It's definitely here to stay, but it is overwhelming, and it is interesting I think, to dive in and look at, you know, what brands are doing, where's the demand? Is there still a demand, or is content considered a requirement? And I think there's like a lot of conversations on what resonates, how do you measure it, you know, how to connect authentically. You know, now you get to like have content strategies and chief content officers and all sorts of stuff, and it's a huge topic in the brand marketing experience.
It's a huge topic, and I think about it from our perspective, from more of a B2B perspective. But whenever I was preparing for the conversation, thinking about it from a B2C conversation and how many channels they have to consider. I mean, so we hear it all the time, content is king, and it's true, more true than probably ever. But if I think about the customers that we work with all the time, all the channels, like I had to write them down. I mean, it's online and their online presence, social, in stores, apps, videos, blogs, user-generated content. I mean, like it just goes on and on. Podcast content. And then I was also thinking and reading about, but you also have to be able to manage and have a cohesive message across the entire brand. And that doesn't entail all of these channels, but it also takes into play the products that they're bringing to market, their customer service teams, their sales teams, the packaging. I mean, there's all of these.
It's like every touch point. It's not just, it's internal touch points that to a consumer, as well as, I'll just call them outside, or, you know, touch points that go like social or podcast or something along those lines. So it's kind of like you've got, to your point, you have in my opinion, the overwhelming part of creating and what's out there. I know we're going to talk about that. Tools to go out there and create content. And what does that look like? How do those tools work? How do they play together? And then, okay, I created all of this. Well, now how do I manage it? How do I measure it? So how do I know what I'm creating is connecting, and how are those connections, you know, meeting whatever my marketing goal is, whether it's traffic or preference or in-store visits or in-restaurant visits or whatever it might be, and being able to track those and then be able to, I guess, kind of hone in on your content strategy, and all while being, you know, authentic, witty, delightful.
So easy.
Yeah, so easy.
That sounds so easy.
It is.
No, I mean, you talked about.
This is why you had an anxiety attack and we're up at night. Don't worry, people, she got some rest on the plane. But, you know.
When I finally arrived at my hotel at 1:30 this morning. So, yes, if I'm looking so fresh, this is why. But, no, I mean, I think about part of the reason we're doing Colorbar was because we needed new ways to create content. But we were talking about it in advance of today, that we're creating as much content as we can. We have our reps ask for it all the time. So you're creating, but then you have to figure out what is actually working. Where do we need to continue to dedicate our time towards that? And then I think about just Sandy, and then multiply that times a Nike, times a Starbucks, times hats off to these brands that are really trying to to figure it out. And one of the things that we were talking about is just the complexity around it. So content is king. We have to do it. We have to create it. But then there you add all of these complexities that we've just talked about.
As far as managing it.
Yes.
And you also look at the landscape, because a lot of times, when you're kind of looking at these things, then it's like, okay, it's really noisy. Like our content and it's a noisy environment. So how to make good, strong, relevant content and manage that strategically, that it is, a core part of your marketing initiative.
Right.
That's, meeting goals.
Yep. I mean, so we talked about managing all the channels, but we've talked about maintaining authenticity. And it's one of the reasons I like Colorbar, and what we're doing here is doesn't get any more authentic than this.
We already talked about our artificial intelligence. Yes. So once we got put that out there pretty quickly, then it didn't get much more authentic than this.
Yeah, but it is. I mean, you and I talked about this morning, that I've been using AI way more than I ever thought I would, probably, in creating content for us. But there is that little voice in the back of my head that's going, "You're cheating.
You're cheating.
You're cheating using this. It's not really fully Betsy. Is it really fully Sandy?" And so you talked about how you really struggle with it, being a content creator for as long as you have been.
I do struggle with it, and I haven't gotten as far as everybody else with that. And part of it is that struggle. It's kind of like, am I cheating? Am I, it's that fine line between, am I being efficient? Am I being lazy? Am I not thinking through it? Did I not have the thought? I mean, obviously, if you're using those tools and you're using them as tools, you still have to have the thought to, train the tool to give you a response back.
That's right.
And then understanding, whether that response needs to be honed in, or if you just use it for ideation. Now, I do know a lot of people who don't necessarily use it for content, but also just use it for ideation. Like, is there some idea out there, or some perspective on a packaging idea, that being a big part of how brands go to market and things like that. But yeah, the whole AI, is that my friend or is that my foe? I say we're in the lukewarm dating phase.
You're at the having coffee.
We're having virtual coffee. AI and I are having virtual coffee. I'm seeing how I feel about all of this. I need a little reassurance.
That's hysterical. I actually just before this got an email. So we did a podcast on D-Scoop.
Yes.
So one of my guys from D-Scoop introduced me to a company that's generating AI bots. We teased about the Kelvin and Betsy bots at D-Scoop, but they actually are introducing me, and I'm hopefully going to have a meeting with this company that is creating these AI generated. And I got on their website. Her name is Mindy.
Okay.
And she looked like she could be sitting here having a conversation with us. And so I guess we've created one for the D-Scoop event as well. But I don't know. Again.
And then, like, where does that fit in?
I know, exactly. I mean, so again, there's content and there's this engagement with our consumers. If somebody comes to our website, is there going to be our bot's going to be named Sandy? Clearly, that's going to be her name. But but yeah, how do you feel authentic in that? How do our customers feel versus picking up the phone and talking to us? So I'm very interested to have that conversation about.
So that would be an interesting conversation to have.
Yeah.
Just because, well, even when you online shop or you're looking and the little chat AI assistant comes up.
Yes.
Do you talk to them? I don't talk to them.
No, it weirds me out.
Yeah. I don't.
One day I'll probably have a full-blown conversation with one of them, but currently today I'm still having coffee. Like you said, I'm still having coffee with this person.
If that starts to be the only person you talk to, we will have a different conversation on a different kind of podcast, people. But don't worry about that.
Betsy's no longer with us.
Meet my best friend, Sandy.
God. Okay, now we've lost our minds already.
But we haven't, because it's very much an evolving conversation.
Absolutely.
Like, even when you and I were talking this morning, it was kind of like, we actually think this is like going to be a recurring topic that we talk about and address and kind of understand, well, where is the technology going? Okay, well, now you have the AI bot or the AI shopping assistant or, those types of technology. So it's not just a content generator. It's is it going to revolutionize what the personal, because everybody's still all about being personal.
Right.
So something that's not a person, how does that fit into all of this? And what does that look like in the conversation, where everybody is looking to make personal connections, back to our hyper-personalization movement of 2025 and how the AI plays into that, but then bringing that conversation back to, okay, all of that's now personal content. Like, where does all of this go and how is that, to your point, managed?
Yeah, managed, measured. I'm sitting here looking at some of my notes from this. And then there's the other conversation that I definitely want us to continue too, which came up during Glimpse, and it's come up a couple of times in conversations with customers saying we really want to continue this conversation around content, but also the security behind it, the compliance component behind it. So definitely, again, another conversation that I want us to continue to have, because I think people are really struggling with how to do that with the AI generated content and making sure that from our financial services customers, our healthcare, our insurance customers, what that means for their business is super impactful too.
No, I absolutely. And we touched on some of that compliance conversation with Glimpse,
Right.
with Alex,
Yep.
and what he's seeing in like the healthcare and how different industries, I think different industries are going to have probably some different level of engagement on how the technology gets used. But it is interesting when you're, where it constantly gets smarter.
Yes.
And so does that get you to where you need to go faster? I don't know. And its role, its role in companies, its role in your marketing department, your creative department. There used to be lots of concern about, is AI going to replace me?
No, I don't.
Well, it might replace me.
Definitely. There's no replacing you, Kim. There's no replacing you, but there still has to be that human factor. And I think everybody's been very consistent in that. And in preparation for this conversation, what does the future of this look like? And it was talking about new roles that are being created.
Just to manage this. Yeah.
Just to manage this. So it's AI editors and it's AI strategists. And you mentioned it at the very beginning of the conversation. There's now chief content officers that are alongside the CMOs and others, because it's such a huge topic. When I was researching for this, there's the Content Marketing Institute, which I plan on reaching out to them to get them to become part of this conversation.
That would be awesome for part of the conversation, and it'd be interesting to get their perspective as we're all kind of like, hey, you're trying to figure it out. You had institute in your title. I don't have that in mine. We could use some.
We need some institutions.
We need some institutions.
We need some institutions, but also just hearing they had highlighted some of the trends that they thought they were going to see, and they had interviewed a ton of people from multiple industries, but to see all the different titles that were popping up during this conversation is wild, and it just proves how much all these brands are trying to figure it out. Because again, as you said, it's now an expectation.
I think it is an expectation. Well, I'll take that back. That was just my thought. I was just like, we know that omni-channel is a really big topic of conversation and how it drives results. So within that omni-channel is all of your platforms and your social. And so you've got, this kind of crosses over everything.
Yeah.
And yeah, so my comment earlier was how much of content is demand, because once you get past all of that, it, immediately brings you to, but you're in a very noisy space. So what is demanded and what is like the cost of entry? Like, oh, they're on Instagram, they're on LinkedIn, they do a podcast, they have a website. So you've got all of those different, those different channels. And is that just an expectation now? So if you're going in, and it's different, like if you're starting a business,
right,
or you want to start a brand, and the expectation is you still have to manage all of this. And so, all of these companies started somewhere and said, now you're taking it to that level, and how much of it is needed and how much of it is really effective and how much of it is just kind of white noise.
Right. I mean, we're talking about this, that if you look at the companies that you see the case studies for of how brands are doing it the right way, and it's Starbucks and Nike and Netflix, and it's these huge brands that do have teams of strategists and people focused only on AI and measuring the results and data scientists and all these things that we've talked about. And then you have
us.
Then you have brands that are also having to figure it out. And so to be able to sit back and watch how these brands that are revolutionizing and really trying to take advantage and figure it out, for us to be able to watch and learn
kind
from
like
these
best practices type of things.
Absolutely.
Like what you're out there, but how can I take what you're doing, Nike, and look at how we do things and then understand how to do that better.
Right. Well, and you also think about from a B2B versus a B2C perspective, it feels like the B2Cs have a whole nother level of complexity as well. And so how do we apply what they're doing to consumers to what we're doing in marketing to brands and working with our sales teams and all of that. So I think there's going to be a lot to learn.
I do too. Some of us have more to learn than others. Hey. Yeah, and I think it's also going to be really important, or I would think from where we are in kind of like the process of creating consumer engagement, that our understanding of content and how it impacts the consumer world is, I think, really key. Now, it may not all apply to how we have to connect to brands in our world, but bringing what we have to the table and helping them make that journey and make that correct connection, I think, is critical for us to have that type of understanding, like exactly what is going on in this environment.
Yeah, I mean, it's talking about learning from others. I mean, again, we talked about this as well, the snackable content conversation. So like if I hear about what others are considering and using podcasts and using all these outlets that we're now dipping our foot into, but even unknown to us was, okay, how do we take snippets of this and make it relevant and poignant and make it enough that somebody actually wants to listen to at least 2 minutes of a conversation versus a whole 15 minutes. And so again, just having those little takeaways that we're learning as we're going.
Because we did not, or I didn't, we didn't really know that when we started out with this until we kind of were like, okay, content, content, right next to AI from our previous episodes, and, diving into it. And then it's like, oh, it's not a snippet, it's a snackable. So noted.
Yes,
yes. Yeah, so there is a learning curve, but it is fascinating.
Yeah, well, and each time you've said content, the thing that keeps popping up in my mind is relevant.
Yeah.
And so how do we create this content, figure out what works, figure out what people are seeing as relevant. And I think that's what all of us are really kind of trying to figure out.
I agree.
At this point. So
most definitely.
Final thoughts on content.
Well, I'm going to have a virtual coffee.
with your AI bot?
With my AI, so I can chat up GPT.
Yes.
But there is that. But it is exciting. So I think from a technology standpoint and how that understanding what it can do and then really understanding how to leverage it and what its role can be is going to be really fascinating, not only for us and how we create connections, but how we help our clients and our brands make connections that they're looking to do.
Yeah. Yep. On that note, we're going to wrap up this conversation, but I would encourage any of you that are listening, reach out to us, email, comment as we post. Are you guys struggling with all of this too? If you're an expert and want to share more, we'd love to have you join us on Colorbar, because as we said, we want to continue this conversation.
Absolutely.
I think it's an important one and one that has many layers that we can cover here on Colorbar. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Look forward to our next episode.
I know. I can't wait.
And also kind of looking forward to see where this whole content conversation goes. I think it's going to be really interesting.
Same.
All right.
Good to see you.
You too.